Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The recent corporate announcement of a merger of equals between BB&T and Suntrust Bank will potentially create the nation's sixth largest bank, and it brings the spotlight and attention back onto economic development. Not that it was ever not, but it's now more than just bringing a headquarters to North Carolina and specifically in Charlotte, but it also suggests that maybe this economic slowdown that we've been looking for may not be as immediate as we originally thought. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business policy and public affairs here in the Carolinas. I am Chris William, and again, our dialogue, we will talk to economic developers about this most recent tie-up between BB&T and Suntrust Bank. But more than that, what does that mean for the near term? How does it reduce or consolidate headcount, at least for these two organizations? But more importantly, what is relevant to urban cores, since they will be locating in Charlotte? And in general, how does economic development bode for this year? In a moment, Michael Smith from Charlotte's Center City Partners, Otis Rawl of the Lexington, South Carolina Chamber, and Mark Farris of the Greenville Area Development Corporation. We hope you'll stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, a panel discussion on economic development featuring Otis Rawl of the Lexington Area Chamber of Commerce, Mark Farris from the Greenville Area Development Corporation, and Michael Smith of Charlotte Center City Partners.
Hello, welcome to our program. All the good dialogue happens right before the camera starts. And then I ask the question and you all say, well, we just talked about that. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being on the program. Good to see you. Michael, we'll start with you. So the BB&T Suntrust announcement is not insignificant. We'll create the sixth largest bank in this country. They announced that they want to go to Charlotte for a headquarters. Don't quite know where yet, but what are the implications for Charlotte? Does this mean that Charlotte won their crown back and now financial services second largest in the nation and, hitting on all 8 cylinders? What does it mean for the city?
I love this announcement because as opposed to the normal RFQ process where you try to get narrowed down to a few cities and then you try to win, this one was done in the boardroom and they selected our region.
So there wasn't a jockeying by economic development?
No, to me this is affirmation of cities and communities that work hard on the blocking and tackling of workforce, of smart infrastructure, of the investments that you make, the leadership of elected officials, civic leaders, business leaders across a long period of time that prepare a community so that, when you have two great corporations coming together that need a new city, that you would be a natural place to receive them and partner with them. So it's big for us. It'll be big in the short term. It'll be even bigger in the long term. This one will pay dividends for a while.
Mark, is it a Cinderella announcement for cities like Charlotte?
I don't think so. Everything today, Chris, is about labor. There's a theory in economic development called agglomeration, which says the more industry of one type that you have, the more you'll get, and the ability for them to find the experienced and excellent labor that they'll need to run the bank is here in Charlotte. So it's region-wide really, but that impact is pretty significant.
Odie, what do you think?
Well, for South Carolina, we were talking, Suntrust doesn't have a real big presence, but I think the bleed off that we'll get is hoping CEOs and We'll move into South Carolina, and we will be getting that type of leadership that can look into our communities and help us grow our communities and really start bonding with Charlotte to start talking about those issues that make us a lot alike. And Michael and I talked a little bit earlier about public transit between the different communities and things of that sort. And all that plays into workforce, economic development, what having the sixth largest bank means here, other corporations coming in.
Supply chain.
I think South Carolina's could be the beneficiary of companies coming into this area because you've got great banking institution, great financing, and they can find a way to locate
the airport, et cetera,
those types of things, yes.
Yeah, so Michael, back to Charlotte for a second. So all the employees, I guess, all the employees from BB&T are thinking, okay, I live in Winston-Salem, I live in other places. What's going to happen to my job? I think consolidation, headcount, a reduction of headcount. Suntrust clearly moving from Atlanta to Charlotte. That's a big win again for Charlotte in that way. But as consolidation happens, as we watch this unfold, will areas like the Triad and Winston-Salem, what would you guess, and I know you don't officially speak for the bank, but would you guess will be okay?
I think you're going to see a lot of sensitivity to its legacy markets, and they're still figuring all that out. But the early moves were about corporate banking in Atlanta and community banking in Winston. They've got great legacy workforces there. I think what they're trying to do is become stronger together. You know, moving from 16th and 17th largest to 6th largest, there's going to be consolidation and buying power. And those efforts of how far can we go with our labor, I think that they'll be very sensitive to those markets. And I also think that Winston and Greenville and Columbia, that we're going to become more and more of one trade area. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll find that headquarters tapping into other markets around us for complementary skill sets they need that maybe don't need to be in co-tenancy with the headquarters.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it. I'll get to you, Mark, but I want to go through Columbia in the Midlands first, because I think of the debate that goes on in Columbia, Otis, and these are my words, that Columbia feels like, to some degree, that they've been left out in a lot of the growth that Greenville and the upstate and Charleston have been. So do announcements like this, are they encouraging to leaders in Columbia when they try to find a new strategy for growth and development?
Well, I think we were talking earlier too, a lot of what's happened in Columbia is self-inflicted. In that whole Midlands area, you kind of got Greenville, Spartanburg, you got the Midlands, and you got Charleston. They all got things that are going on that makes them a little bit different, you know, electricity costs and all that, and the Duke here makes Greenville, Spartanburg a lot more profitable for bringing intensive industry there. You got the port that brings, you know, the Boeings.
Right.
And Columbia's kind of in no man's land with high property taxes and high energy costs. So when you start looking at Columbia, you start looking at what's there now, and a lot of it's the legal community, state government, some banking institutions and all. But I think from a Midland standpoint, we've got to figure out what we want to do and where we want to go if we could be able to pull some of this stuff off that Michael's talking about that can bleed into the other areas of North Carolina and South Carolina. But we've got to be a little bit more aggressive in the Midlands about recruiting and identifying who we are and what we will try to be over the next 10 to 15 years.
And just quickly, do you feel like the leaders, Midland Leader Business Forum, do you think they're getting to that point where they're finally finding something that they can all rally around and be more aggressive?
Yeah, I think the metrics that we're using, comparing us to other capital cities and plus cities inside South Carolina, North Carolina, we finally get it. And it's taken us a little while, but the business community is finally stepping up and saying the public sector can't do it by themselves. The private sector has to intervene if we're ever going to be successful.
So, Mark, you spent time in the Charlotte region. You now in the upstate of South Carolina for the last few years. So, you've been in very progressive areas of growth. As you hear Michael talk about Charlotte, we're going to get to some of Charlotte's growth because it's been pretty incredible. Yeah. Do you get let's peel back this challenge, good problems to have, growth, congestion, traffic, property values, which leads, of course, to affordable housing. all of those big bad issues that we have in front of us, are those going to take our eye off the ball of growth?
No, I don't think so. I think we're still in the path of growth. Certainly, we were talking about how the region, all of the deals affect the region. When the Amazon project came through, over 120 communities I think submitted. We submitted in Greenville, but we called ourselves Charlanta. So we were trying to take advantage of the impact that would have on the entire region. But I think the issue with growth, Chris, is planning. Have we done a good job in planning, land use planning? My peers, I've been disappointed in the professional development work that we've had. We don't have land use planning training. We don't think about what it means. My community has a lack of serviceable industrial sites, and that's been a priority for us to get more balance in the land use. Greenville's a great place to live. Quality of life is unparalleled. New people are moving in every day, but with that comes a requirement to have commercial and industrial balance. We've got to do a better job with that to avoid some of the issues that you're talking about.
How does that roll off of you, Michael, when you hear about land use and planning ahead and making sure you have inventory when you are Charlotte? You got a core, and you're growing out from that, but how much of a plan are you out in front of here?
Mark just nailed it. I mean, great cities are creating the context for tomorrow's vibrancy. And that's what we do. And what we're doing is we're creating product on the shelf so that as the economy changes, as opportunities present themselves, you've got product, you're able to go from wholesale to retail to market really quickly. And for downtown planning, which is just a microcosm of city planning, really, we do a new downtown plan every 10 years. And we've been doing it since 1966 with the Odell plan. We're about to start our next downtown plan.
And
those are
Charlotte?
and those are not 10-year plans. Those are 50-year plans that you renew every 10 years. And that matching of land use planning and transportation planning is the biggest move we've made as a community.
Okay, so let's assume you're getting that right. It's evident in things like cost of affordable housing. As you stand in front of your board or the citizens in Charlotte and talk about the great successes that have gone on, how do you mitigate that cost? That, gosh, people, what the average rent in downtown Charlotte now for a one bedroom is $1,500 or so, plus or minus. I mean, it's somewhat prohibitive. So how do you remediate that?
I think that's a good word, remediate, because you don't want to throttle back this incredible capitalism. You have to act and mitigate and remediate with it, because that growth in rent brings new capital to our community, brings new talent, brings new jobs, brings new development, and they work together. Same thing with hotel room rates, same thing with office space. And then the office buildings start to trade, and it stays just ahead of the cost of creation of new, so then you continue to build new buildings. And that's been our trick, is building new buildings, because then we've got supply. So then we can compete for jobs that are out in the market. So, but back to the affordable housing side of things, it has to be, to Otis's point, it's got to be this combination of the business community and the public sector coming together and owning that together. So that, we just passed $50 million of housing trust fund bonds. But at the same time, the Foundation for the Carolinas has circled up our corporate community, and they're going to raise $50 to $70 million.
And that's a way to subsidize, hate to use that term, but that's a way to underwrite housing enough to allow it to be affordable.
Subsidize is the right word, because you're trying to provide housing to people that, based on their average monthly income, can't service the rent. So you have to find a way to buy down the cost of it so the rent they can afford can allow the product to happen.
I'm going to ask you a question about that in just a second, Otis. Coming up on the program, Jim Newsom is the president and CEO of the South Carolina Ports Authority, and talk about wild success, even in light of China trade debates. They have done well through the Ports Authority in South Carolina. Also, the agricultural commissioners for both North and South Carolina will be on this program You know, interesting, the single largest business in the Carolinas is agribusiness. We'll find out about that. And then David Dotson from MDC in Raleigh will be our guest on this program. Otis, as you've heard Mark and Michael talk about some of these challenges around city core and just urban growth, you think about Charleston is already limited by one side because you can't go out, right?
Right.
How does Charleston grapple with this? It almost seems like it's runaway and out of control in the Low Country.
Well, it is, and a lot of municipalities down there are trying to control growth now through issuing a number of building permits and that type of stuff. I mean, if you look at the number of just workforce type folks that they need at Volvo and Boeing, 35 families are moving there daily. Wow. So that's putting a real tax on the infrastructure, not only roads and water and sewer, but also where do you put these folks in houses and all. And I think the one thing that Columbia is really doing well is these public-private partnerships that are building downtown living facilities for folks are affordable. Unlike Charleston, unlike Greenville, you can get a downtown apartment, and what you're starting to see in Columbia and the surrounding areas is livability matrix are starting to grow, and people are starting to look at Columbia a lot differently now than they have in the past. It's kind of a cheap place to live that's affordable for young adults that are coming out of school, and we're finding that more and more of the students coming out of South Carolina are staying in Columbia now. Our challenge is to find high-paying jobs that will keep them in the Midlands area and all.
Mark, is talent and affordable housing the magic bullets in Greenville as well, in the upstate?
Certainly talent is, and if you think about, we were talking earlier, our ability to win projects is all about convincing them they're going to be able to find their special labor, whether it's manufacturing or IT or whatever. But talking about the affordable housing, it's a huge issue in Greenville, and certainly I think we've got to do a better job, because what have we historically done? We said, okay, here's a subsidized development, and here are the rest. Why can't we incorporate those two? Why can't we put affordable housing into some of these units that are extremely high rent, extremely nice, but why can't we combine those two and require, in fact, the developers to say, yeah, we're going to take advantage. Market conditions dictate rent, right? So we can't control that. What we can do is require them, in fact, to say, yes, as part of your plan in downtown Greenville, you need to incorporate some worker housing.
But, and I'm going to come back to you, but Charlotte did that with 3rd and 4th Ward areas of that city, which are close to downtown. They compelled it.
They did. Hope 6 grants is how that was done.
Thank you. And that was a decade or so ago?
Maybe 2.
It's crazy, isn't it? How has that turned out?
I think that the 1st Ward in Uptown is one of the great examples of urban mixed income communities. I really think it is. Now we've got to figure out how do we take it to the next level, because that's pretty low density for who we are now 2 decades later. So we've got to figure out how do we do that in mid and high rise and greater density locations.
Is it easier to do when you have high rises, and it can, I don't want to use this term, but it's harder to do.
It's harder. And it comes down a lot of times to lending, not to put it back to you as a banker, but
luckily I don't wear that hat on this program.
But the banks have they've got a box that they try to fit stuff in, because they've got to be right 99% of the time, and it makes it harder. But there's some new approaches that are being laid out, and I think that housing trust fund money, housing funds being raised by private entities, getting more of our for-profit developers to make the move over, and as Mark suggested, trying to capture some of, if it's 5%, if it's 10% of the units, and mix them in.
So Mark, do you have to compel, and I don't mind naming names, do you have to compel guys like Bob Hughes in Greenville to say, Bob, we really need your leadership in this part of the city to have some subsidized housing within your normal high quality development?
No, you don't compel them, you incent them.
So you motivate them by doing what?
Well, if you think about, we've got one project, particularly in Greenville, I'm very excited about, Judson Mill. It's an old Milliken facility that's in a, in a questionable area of town, but they have come in. Belmont Sayer actually is the developer on this, so they did the American Tobacco in Raleigh, yeah. But they're incorporating worker housing. They're doing even industrial in this complex. They're reserving some space for industrial. They're putting apartments, but they're worker housing. They're targeted towards that. And in return, we gave them the Bailey bill, which allows them to keep the assessment on their property at a certain level for a period of time, so that even as they increase, get commercial, get office, get the industrial, their property taxes won't increase. They can sell that to the market.
Otis, that would seem like this is easy work to do in Columbia. You've got the inventory. There's plenty of space downtown. Everyone's looking to develop a city, or what they call center city or city center down there. Wouldn't that be an easy job?
Well, you would think so, but Mark and I were talking again. I know 2 or 3 projects that have looked to come downtown, and for whatever reason, they've just died on the stalk. And I don't understand. It's when you come into Charlotte, you see 8, 10, 15 cranes. You come into Columbia, you don't see anything. And a lot of these high-rise projects for different types of housing and all, those things should be happening now, and they're not. And matter of fact, I'm fixing to pen a editorial to say, where are the cranes? What's happening? Wow, cranes are one of the significant signals, at least in my mind, of vibrancy of a city and whether they're doing what they're doing. You go to Spartanburg, you come to Charlotte, you go to Greenville, you go to Charleston, there's cranes everywhere. You go into Columbia, there's nothing.
How is, Raleigh's been interesting in this, Michael, and I know you can't speak for necessarily formally for Raleigh, but you look at Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and oh yeah, by the way, they're trying to redo RTP now, so we're going to have that inventory coming online soon, whatever that looks like.
Right.
So Raleigh now competes with Durham, that clearly has logged into a cool factor. So all of that area now is almost competing internally, but they yet seem to work together. How would you characterize the triangle?
I think the triangle is making some really good moves. I mean, downtown Durham, I was up there visiting with Blue Cross Blue Shield about a month ago, and I had such a great experience in downtown Durham. It's just exciting what they have reclaimed, and they've got so much inventory of great old buildings. The food scene's great. They're big enough downtowns. They've got to continue to find ways to connect them. For them to operate as a region, they've got to cooperate.
Chris, can I ask Michael a question about how do you bring, or how has Charlotte been so successful in bringing community leaders and the public policy makers together to do what you're talking about doing? Because that's a lot easier said than done. I mean, have y'all been so progressive in being able to do that?
Well, I love the fact that you reflect on us as being progressive at that, because when you're in the soup of it, it seems so hard.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been a part of it. And I think it's something we're actually working on really hard. This move by the creation of the alliance, the merger, the regional partnership, and the chamber was a real indication that we want the region at the table, that we've got to act as one employment market, that these arbitrary lines that are drawn are just that, and that our employers, our consumer products companies, anybody we're trying to draw here, the talent, they don't care about those lines.
Right.
We've got a couple minutes left. I want to very quickly get your sense. Michael, are you hopeful on what's called the regular session in North Carolina for the General Assembly? Are you hopeful that you will get what you need for priority on legislation?
I think that the relationship between our region and Raleigh, because of leadership, is moving in the right direction. So I'm bullish on what this session can mean for us. I think that there's been great partnership in both directions on economic development projects. I think our mayor's done a really nice job of getting up to Raleigh, forming relationships. I think hosting the RNC and the way she stood up for that as an economic development effort for our state was a big move.
And that might obviously benefit Charlotte in many ways. Legislatively, short session in South Carolina, you're going to get what you need out of that as a developer?
Property tax reform's on the table. Odie knows this better than anybody, but every 10 years we bring up property tax reform. it never really addresses the meat of the issues, but it's that time. So the decade's rolled around, and so we're going to talk about tax reform. What that means, I couldn't tell you, because normally it's incremental change. It's not the kind of change that we need.
It's not broad-based. Tax reform?
Two things. I think you got to talk about tax reform and education simultaneously because they're all tied together. Tax reform, North Carolina had a big program that went through 2 or 3 years ago. South Carolina stood and took notice, so Tax Foundation's been in there, got reports out, so that's going to be debatable. But I think the second issue is education, and that's probably the one issue, and it goes back to what we're talking about, being able to have find qualified workforce, and you can't do that if you don't have qualified teachers in the classroom, and we're able to deliver the types of educational quality that we need to produce the type of work that we need.
That's the last word. I hope you all get what you want, because it seems like there's some real momentum. Thank you for coming on the program, especially last minute. Until next week, I'm Chris Wadium. Hope your weekend is good. Thank you. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Colonial Life, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.